All right, good morning. Today I'm going to compare the Osmo 360 using the single lens mode to the Action 6 to see if you can use the Osmo 360 in a pinch as an action camera, because maybe you want a 360 camera and an action camera all in one rather than buying a separate 360 camera and an action camera basically. So let's see how both of these cameras compare to each other when it comes to the image quality. I'm using now automatic exposure settings, same manual white balance to keep the colors consistent as much as possible. D-Log M, but I'm not going to apply any color grading in post-production. I'm just going to do basic color correction and that's it. Also, I use the highest resolution possible on both of these cameras. And then texture is set to -1 on both of them as well. Bitrate is also set to high, and that's basically it. So let's start with the comparison here. Let's try to emulate like a backlight contrasty scene to see the overall dynamic range performance, if you will. Although this is automatic settings, and it's very hard to determine dynamic range performance with automatic settings, honestly. Right, let's go inside here to emulate like a dark scene, if you will. Let's go right beside the light. Let's make it as challenging as possible by backlighting myself here. This is a very tough scene to handle for the cameras because I'm backlit, and also there's a lot of like shadows and whatnot. I honestly think the Action 6 is going to be slightly better, at least when it comes to the overall detail, because I've done the same comparison, but with the Action 5 Pro, and the Action 5 Pro was significantly more detailed than the Osmo 360. All right, now let's do minimum focus distance test. I'm using f4 in here right now. Before I was using automatic aperture basically. And at f4, the minimum focus distance should be 20 centimeters in here. And I don't really remember what's the minimum focus distance for the 360 camera, but let's see which one is sharper basically. Now I'm holding the cameras about 30 centimeters away from me. Let's bring it closer. This is about 15, 20 centimeters roughly. Let me actually get into the light so you can see a bit better. This is about 15, 20 centimeters. And theoretically, the Action 6 should provide a more detailed and sharper image basically. All right, and now switch the aperture to f2.8 on the Action 6, which should increase the minimum focus distance to about 35 to 40 centimeters. So let's see at this setting which one is better at least. Now I'm about 20 centimeters away from the camera. All right, and I've set both of these cameras to ISO 6400, which is the maximum ISO of the Osmo 360, and then I manually adjusted the exposure with the shutter to push these cameras to their absolute limits, basically. Also, I'm using f2.6 on the Action 6, and you can just look around this shot, especially in here. Look at the noise, look at the color artifacts and whatnot. Also, you can look at the skin to see which one preserves the color of my skin a bit better. I think the Action 6 is going to be a bit better in this, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm not really sure. And also, this is the ISO, the maximum ISO of the Osmo 360, but the Action 6 can go to a stop higher to 12,800 to get even more light into the sensor. So let me switch to that and see how it compares to the Osmo 360. Okay, and right now I'm using ISO 12,800 on the Action 6. This is basically the worst case scenario when it comes to the noise you will get with this camera. Let's see how it compares to the Osmo 360. Hopefully the image is going to be cleaner with the Action 6, even at ISO 12,800, but let's see. All right, and now here is a SuperNight mode comparison for you guys. I'm using 4K resolution, 25p automatic exposure settings, 5200 Kelvin white balance on both of these cameras. And yeah, let me just step out of the light and see how both of these cameras compare basically when it comes to the overall noise, colors, and pretty much everything else. Okay, let's do this. Stress the cameras as much as possible. And you just look at the overall noise in the image, the colors, skin tones, and basically all this stuff. Let's get back to the darkness. Okay. All right, this should give you a rough idea of how the Osmo 360 using the single lens mode compares to the Action 6, at least in terms of like the overall image quality. I think overall the Action 6 is going to be significantly more detailed, sharper than the Osmo 360, but maybe for you, the Osmo 360 using the single lens mode is going to be more than enough, because maybe you want a 360 camera and an action camera basically at the same time. But one thing that I'm kind of thinking about now, on the lens of the Action 6, it says f2 to f4, but in the settings, you are only allowed to go down to f2.6 and not f2. Why am I missing some of my apertures, if you will? I want to be able to go down to the lowest aperture possible in case if I want to bring even more light into the sensor, but I guess it's something to think about. Regardless, hopefully it was informative to you, right? And I guess I'll see you in the next video. Let me know down below which camera you prefer between these two. Thanks for watching.